Somewhere between 3 and 3:30 p.m. on July 2nd, General Meade catches wind that something's not right with the 3rd Corps. And he rides out to see General Sickles. And he finds the 3rd Corps along the Emmitsburg Road. And he confers with Sickles. And there is a lot of debate about what was actually said there, but I think what we could take away from all of the conflicting reports is that Meade did not want Sickles here. He may or may not have agreed with Sickles' reasoning, but he did not want Sickles here. His flank was in the air, and his line was too thin. And Sickles asks, well, do you want me to return to my original position? And it's widely believed that Meade's response was yes, and then pointing across the Emmitsburg Road at the Confederates says, but I don't think they're going to allow you time to do that. And thus the battle will open up with Sickles' entire corps stretched out and in an advanced and in the air position. So while Sickles and Meade were conferring along the Emmitsburg Road, the Confederates reopened the Battle of Gettysburg with some long-range artillery. And Meade then had to scramble to find troops needed to plug the holes that were created by Sickles advancing his corps. Because the Confederates overlapped Sickles' new line, he would end up sending troops from the 2nd Corps, as well as troops from the 5th Corps. General Meade would also be forced to pull troops from the 12th Corps off of Culp's Hill and send them over here to aid Sickles. And this decision would prove to be almost fatal for the Union Army later that evening. And later in the day, soldiers from the 6th Corps would also be sent over to the Union left flank. And you got to remember, one area that was defenseless was Little Round Top, which would prove to be the key to the battlefield. So as Sickles' line was collapsing, he did remain cool and calm under fire. I just showed you the Trossel barn, and as he was coming up around the Trossel barn and got to this spot, Sickles was badly wounded. A cannonball tore off his leg. And surprisingly, it did not injure his horse named Tammany at all. Sickles remained calm, turned command of the Corps over to General Birney, and he was removed from the battlefield. A saddle strap was used as a makeshift tourniquet to try to stop the bleeding because he was bleeding profusely. And this cannon shot that tore off his leg, well, that in General Sickles' mind would make him a war hero, and he would continue to fight the Battle of Gettysburg in a war of words, particularly with General Meade, up to and including Meade's death and beyond. So as I mentioned, as Sickles was being taken off the battlefield with a saddle strap around his leg to keep from bleeding to death, smoking a cigar, that pretty much ended his military career. The next day, on July 3rd, as the cannonade was going on for Pickett's charge, Sickles was being transported down to Westminster, Maryland, to catch a train to Washington, D.C., where he could receive proper medical care. And as a result of being the first general from the Battle of Gettysburg to arrive in Washington, Lincoln was very curious to know what was happening, what happened there. So Sickles became the first person to give President Lincoln a candid, although maybe not the most accurate, description of what took place here on July 1st and July 2nd. Sickles would recover. He would spend some time in upstate New York with friends. However, one person who was not there was his wife. She would die. Teresa would die a few years after the war ended in 1868. And shortly thereafter, the only child he had with his first wife, she would end up drinking herself to death despite pleas for help from her father. Sickles would ignore her too. In 1864, Sickles tried to get command of his 3rd Corps back. However, due to the high casualties that the 3rd Corps suffered here at Gettysburg, pretty much mostly due to Sickles and his lack of ability to notify his commanding officer what he was doing, the 3rd Corps would be dissolved. So, due to a reorganization in 1864, the Army of the Potomac was only 3 corps strong. Granted, they were 3 very large corps, consisting of the 6th, 5th, and 2nd Corps. So Sickles tries to get his command back, and even arguing that, well, the Confederates let Richard Ewell have Corps command and he only has 1 leg, and well, that didn't get him anywhere. So Sickles will never see action again after Gettysburg, but he will fight a war of words about what he did here really for the rest of his life. Sickles will make some good and not so good arguments about moving his corps the way he did here at Gettysburg. The most valid reason being was, well, he couldn't see what was on the other side of the Emmitsburg Road. But he would also make an argument that his original position was not good and he did not have enough men to defend his original position. Let's take a look at that argument. Sickles had about 10,000 men between his 2 divisions here at Gettysburg, and his original position, the original line, was about 1 mile long. However, the new position he took up was 1.5 miles long, had a dangerous salient in it that the Confederates were able to exploit to their advantage, and again, he left his right flank in the air. So if he didn't have enough men to defend 1 mile, he certainly did not have enough men to defend 1.5 miles. As I also mentioned, Sickles and Meade did not get along very well. And on March 12th, 1864, a newspaper article in the New York Herald appeared, and it was clearly an attempt to try to vindicate Sickles, while at the same time smearing the reputation of General Meade. And the article was signed under the pseudonym Historicus. Who was Historicus? Well, to this day, we really don't know for sure. Was it General Sickles? In my opinion, it could not have been anybody but General Sickles. I mean, if he was not the actual writer, he was certainly dictating what Historicus wrote about the actions here at Gettysburg. And some of the things that were written there were as follows. The 3rd Corps arrived in time to participate in fighting on July 1st. Well, no, that's historically accurate. Meade was planning to retreat from Gettysburg the whole time. And this really did damage Meade's reputation. He had to really go to some lengths to get people to prove that he was not planning to retreat from Gettysburg. And it didn't really help that Meade's chief of staff was a holdover. Dan Butterfield was originally Joe Hooker's chief of staff, and when Hooker resigned and stepped down, Meade asked Butterfield to stay on as chief of staff to really help deal with the crisis of having Confederates running around Pennsylvania. And Meade did not get along with Dan Butterfield. Butterfield didn't like Meade anymore either. This is the interesting thing about the Civil War, is the fact that there's so many personalities and how the personalities play out. But there was at least 2 articles that I'm aware of written by Historicus that really attempted to vindicate Sickles and smear Meade. And the interesting thing was, a lot of the stuff that was appearing in these articles would have been information that only somebody in the position of Corps Command or on Meade's staff would have known. So at the end of the Civil War in 1865, it was very obvious that Sickles' military career was over, but he was a wounded veteran, and he was quite proud of the fact that he lost a leg at Gettysburg. While others may have felt bad about losing a limb, Sickles was quite proud of the fact that he lost a leg here at Gettysburg. He never wanted an artificial leg. He preferred to have his pant leg rolled up so he could show people that he was missing a leg. And he would actually even take that leg on tour with him at times and show people, well, this is my leg. I lost it at Gettysburg. He would remain in politics, a member of the Federal House of Representatives for one more term. And surprisingly, during that term is when Sickles is awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions here at Gettysburg. Surprise, surprise. It's good to have friends in high places. He would also go on to become Minister of Spain, and while over there, his womanizing did not end. He would marry a woman over there and have 2 children with her. But when his ministry was up and he had to return to the United States, his wife didn't want to come with him, so he basically just said, okay, I'll see you later. Have a nice life. And he returned to the United States alone. And as he got older, he would have a nurse aide help take care of him, and by all indications started an affair with her as well. But, Sickles wasn't all bad. He would inherit a very large sum of money, around $5 million, when his father died late in life. So around 1890, Sickles becomes a millionaire several times over. But he would die pretty much penniless because he could not help but help Civil War veterans who were down on their luck, especially if they served in the Third Corps. So between women and some bad investments and helping veterans, Sickles would die pretty much almost penniless. Another interesting fact about Sickles' life there, as I mentioned, had a hard time with money. He did try to petition to get promoted to the rank of lieutenant general, thus would raise his annual pension to $7,500 a year. However, that attempt was a failure. He never was promoted. He loved Gettysburg. That's one thing that him and I have in common. I gotta say, I started coming to this battlefield in 1990. It was really from 1990 until about the year 2007 that I was in real debate about whether or not what Sickles did here was right or wrong, until I finally concluded that because he did not notify Meade, because he took so much upon himself, he really did put not only his men, but the entire Union Army in jeopardy. And for that, I don't think we can forgive him. He also just did not seem like a very nice person. He allowed his wife, Teresa, to basically die of a broken heart. He allowed his daughter to drink herself to death. And he was really one of the last generals of the Civil War to pass away. He would be here for the 50th reunion in 1913, and he would pass away on May 3rd, 1914. My master's thesis, when I was working on my master's in history, was on Dan Sickles and what he did here, and I took that thesis and added to it and had this book published here, my book, Defending the Union Left Flank. General Daniel Sickles at the Battle of Gettysburg. And I just want to read you the last paragraph, because I did actually go once to Arlington National Cemetery and visit Sickles' grave. And I think the last paragraph of this book really just sums up Dan Sickles. Teresa Sickles was first interred at a cemetery in Manhattan before being relocated to Ringwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. She is buried there with her daughter. Following his death, Sickles was given a formal military funeral before being interred in Arlington National Cemetery. Sickles' final resting place is a perfect reflection of his life, surrounded by military honors he does not deserve and resting hundreds of miles from his wife and daughter. And here are the main sources I used to bring this episode to you. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. Until next time, please keep the history alive.